The heavy, brushed steel lapel pin didn't look like a rescue beacon in the harsh morning light. It looked like a dog tag. By 7 p.m, as the tropical sun began to bake the black sand, the illusion that we were just victims of a random tragedy was completely dead. I sat on a flat shelf of volcanic rock, rolling the Vanguard Holdings logo between my thumb and forefinger. The metal was cold despite the rising heat. A few yards away, the smoking husk of the Gulfstream G650 hissed as the incoming tide washed over the ruined turbine. It was a picturesque graveyard, and we were the ghosts trying to pretend we were still alive. It's a black sight. Victoria was pacing a tight circle in the sand, her heels sinking deep with every agitated step. She had spent the last hour desperately trying to force the impossible into a neat, corporate spreadsheet. Vanguard buys up massive tracts of unmapped land in the Pacific for private research and development. It's highly classified, off-the-book stuff. The cameras, the concrete infrastructure you saw it means were on company property. Which means what, exactly, Victoria? Riley snapped. The journalist was sitting cross-legged on a piece of aircraft debris, furiously scribbling in a waterlogged notebook she had salvaged from a carry-on bag. Her dark eyes were sharp, scanning Victoria like a hostile witness. That HR is going to send a helicopter with mimosas and an apology letter? Because whoever put that pen in Mia's pocket last night didn't ask if she needed medical attention. They sedated her and left her in the dirt for us to find. It's a security protocol. Victoria shot back, her voice climbing an octave, vibrating with brittle panic. She stopped pacing and glared at the group. Think about it. We crashed an unauthorized aircraft into a highly classified company facility. The automated defenses probably triggered. They're assessing us. Once they verify our identities through the optical sensors, they'll initiate a retrieval. It was a beautiful, desperate lie. And looking around the circle, I could see who was buying it. Chloe, the influencer, was nodding frantically, clinging to Victoria's delusion like a life raft. Maya was still unconscious, her breathing shallow but steady beneath the shade of a palm frond. But then I looked at Stella. She was standing at the edge of the rocks, staring out at the ocean. Her dark hair was tangled with salt and wind, her ruined silk blouse clinging to the sweat on her skin. She didn't look like the flawless strategist who used to cut my budgets in half. She looked dangerous. As if feeling my eyes on her, she turned. Without a word, she walked over and sat down beside me on the rock. She didn't leave a professional distance. She sat, so close that her thigh pressed firmly against mine, the heat of her body instantly bleeding through my damp jeans. It was an incredibly intimate, proprietary gesture, completely ignoring the fact that the rest of the group was 10 feet away. The memory of the previous night, her hands gripping my shirt in the dark, her breath hot against my neck, the raw desperation in her voice hung between us like a physical weight. She's going to get them killed, Stella murmured, her voice dropped to a low, husky register meant only for me. She leaned in slightly, the scent of sea salt and her dark vanilla perfume clouding my senses. She needs the company to be the savior, I replied quietly, shifting my weight just enough to press back against her. The friction was subtle, but I saw her pupils dilate in response. If Vanguard isn't coming to rescue us, then Victoria is just a woman in a torn skirt on a beach, and she has zero power. Stella's hand slid onto the rock between us, her pinky finger lightly, deliberately tracing the knuckle of my right hand. But you and I know the truth, Nolan. Vanguard didn't accidentally shoot us down. The pilots locked the cockpit door. They dropped us here. On purpose. She was right. The pin wasn't an accident. The crash wasn't an accident. We were supposed to be on this beach, which means we don't wait for a retrieval team, I said, finally pulling my eyes away from her mouth to look at the dark, looming wall of the jungle. We wait for whoever comes to clean up the mess. We can't wait for anything if we don't find water, Harper interrupted, shattering the private bubble Stella and I had built. The systems engineer walked over, wiping a layer of grime from her forehead with the back of a greasy hand. Lena says Mia is deeply dehydrated. The sedation is masking it, but her lips are cracking. Hell, my lips are cracking. We have 3 bottles of vodka and 0 fresh water. In this heat, we have maybe 48 hours before cognitive functions start shutting down. Less for Maya. Silence fell over the rocks. The visceral, biological reality of thirst suddenly eclipsed the corporate conspiracy. You can argue with the CEO, but you can't argue with biology. There's a ridge about a mile inland, I said, standing up. The loss of Stella's body heat was immediate and jarring. If this island is volcanic, there will be natural catchments or a runoff stream near the base of the incline. Victoria crossed her arms, her jaw tight. You're suggesting we walk back into the jungle. In daylight. When we know there are automated defenses. I'm suggesting we don't die of kidney failure by Thursday, I countered, keeping my tone entirely flat. I'm going in. Harper, I need you to come with me to read the terrain. Riley, you're on salvage detail. Rip whatever fabric you can find from the seats to make water carriers. I'm going too, Stella said, standing up instantly. Her eyes locked onto mine, daring me to tell her no. It wasn't a request. It was a demand to stay within my line of sight. The possessiveness in her posture was palpable. No, I said cleanly. Your shoulder is barely back in its socket. If we have to run, you're a liability. Stella flinched slightly, her pride stung by the blunt assessment, but I saw a flicker of dark, complicated respect flash behind her eyes. Fine, she whispered, stepping into my space, her voice dropping to a deadly, sensual purr. But if you don't come back out of those trees before the sun hits the water, I will burn the rest of this wreckage down just to force them to come look at the smoke. Do you understand me? I nodded, the intensity of her threat sending a sharp spike of adrenaline through my chest. I grabbed the heavy tactical knife from the salvage pile and turned toward the tree line with Harper right behind me. The jungle in the daylight was a different kind of monster. The shadows were deeper, the sound sharper. We were 20 yards into the dense foliage, the heat already suffocating us, when I realized we weren't the only ones who had left the beach this morning. Just ahead, kneeling beside the massive, twisting roots of a banyan tree, was Iris. The quiet, easily overlooked assistant wasn't looking for water. She had the encrypted military keycard out again, and she was sliding it smoothly into a perfectly concealed, biometric card reader embedded directly into the bark of the ancient tree. The jungle didn't make a sound when the bark of the ancient banyan tree seamlessly slid apart. It wasn't wood at all. It was a curved, synthetic polymer shell, perfectly textured and painted to mimic the organic rot of the jungle, concealing a recessed steel cavity lined with faint blue LEDs. I didn't announce my presence. I didn't shout. I simply stepped out of the heavy shadows of the undergrowth, the damp soil absorbing the sound of my boots, and watched the timid accounting assistant raid the company vault. Taking inventory, Iris? My voice was quiet, but in the oppressive silence of the canopy, it landed like a gunshot. Iris didn't flinch. She didn't drop the keycard or gasp in terror. The girl who spent the last 3 years staring at her shoes during corporate meetings calmly finished pulling a heavy, matte black case from the hidden compartment before turning to face me. Her eyes were completely void of panic. You're supposed to be looking for a runoff stream, Nolan, she said, her voice smooth and entirely devoid of the tremor that had infected the rest of the survivors. Harper stepped out from the foliage behind me, her eyes locked onto the glowing blue interior of the hollowed-out tree. The systems engineer looked like she had just been hit with a physical blow. That's a biometric lock, Harper breathed, walking slowly toward the tree, ignoring Iris completely. She ran a dirty, trembling hand over the edge of the synthetic bark. It's hardwired into a localized intranet. There are no power lines. It has to be running off a subterranean grid. Harper turned her head, her blunt, aggressive edge flaring instantly. My air is literally drying out on the sand, and you're quietly opening secret company minibars? If I had opened this in front of Victoria, Iris replied coldly, setting the black case down on a massive root. She would have claimed the contents as executive property. She would have rationed it based on who she deems essential to Vanguard. I don't trust Victoria with resources. But you trust yourself, I said, closing the distance between us. I stopped less than 2 feet from her. The height difference was significant, forcing her to tilt her head up to maintain eye contact. The air in the jungle was thick, suffocating, but Iris was barely sweating. I studied her face, looking past the plain features and the messy hair. The posture was all wrong for an assistant. Her shoulders were relaxed, her center of gravity low. She was braced for an altercation. Who do you actually work for? I asked, keeping my tone deliberately low. crowding her space just enough to test her nerve. Vanguard Holdings, she answered smoothly, not backing away a single inch. Just like you, Nalin. Only my department doesn't audit concrete. We audit personnel. Internal security, Harper realized aloud, her eyes widening. You're a corporate spy. Compliance, Iris corrected softly. She finally broke eye contact with me, reaching down to unlatch the black case. When the lid snapped open, Harper let out a ragged breath. Inside the case were 6 heavy, silver foil pouches of purified water, a basic trauma kit, and a ruggedized, military-grade tablet screen. It was enough water to keep the group alive for another day, maybe 2 if we pushed it. It was salvation. But I didn't look at the water. I looked at the tablet. You didn't come out here just for the hydration, I said, reaching down and pulling the heavy device from its foam casing. The screen was dark, but a small green light blinked steadily at the top edge. What is this? It's a localized mesh network tracker, Iris said, her voice dropping into a hardened, professional cadence. The charade was officially over. She wasn't the quiet assistant anymore. She was the most dangerous person in the room. Every one of these supply caches is a node. When you swipe a card, it logs the entry and downloads the current positional data of the island's security grid. Turn it on, I ordered. Iris hesitated for a fraction of a second, her eyes darting to my face. I didn't move. I just held the tablet out to her. It was a silent, psychological power struggle, fought entirely in the span of 3 seconds. In the office, she would have had the authority of the shadow board behind her. Out here, I had the tactical knife in my belt and the physical presence to enforce a command. She took the tablet, her fingers brushing against mine. Her skin was surprisingly cold. She pressed her thumb against the biometric scanner on the bottom bezel. The screen flared to life, casting a harsh, pale blue light over our faces. It displayed a highly detailed topographical map of the island. We were a blinking blue dot near the eastern shoreline. Scattered across the jungle interior were dozens of stationary green markers, other supply caches. But that wasn't what made the blood freeze in my veins. Spread out in a semicircle, roughly 2 miles inland and moving steadily through the dense terrain, were 4 pulsing red dots. I didn't know it yet, but the illusion that we had time to figure out the island's rules had just evaporated. What are the red markers? Harper asked, her voice tight with rising panic as she stepped closer to look over my arm. The physical proximity was necessary to see the screen, but I could feel the sudden, terrified tension radiating off her body. I don't know, Iris admitted, and for the first time, a microscopic crack of genuine fear showed in her composure. The legend designates them as active assets. I don't have the clearance to see what they are. They're moving, I pointed out, my voice deadly calm. I watched the digital sweep of the radar refresh. One of the red dots shifted forward, adjusting its trajectory. And they're fanning out. They're sweeping the grid, Harper whispered, stepping back from the tablet as if it were a bomb. She looked at me, the blunt, cynical engineer completely giving way to raw, unadulterated survival instinct. Nolan, they're moving toward the beach. They're moving toward the crash site. I looked up from the screen, staring into the dark, impenetrable wall of the jungle. The heat of the morning suddenly felt freezing. Victoria and the others were sitting on the open sand, completely exposed, waiting for a corporate rescue team that was never going to come. Hack the water, I said, handing the tablet back to Iris. I pulled the heavy tactical knife from my belt, the metallic scrape loud in the quiet jungle. We're going back. Now. We didn't hike back to the beach. We tore through the jungle like hunted prey. The heat was no longer just a temperature, it was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, filling my lungs with hot, stagnant water. I led the way, hacking violently at the dense, waxy foliage with the heavy galley knife, carving a straight line toward the sound of the crashing waves. Behind me, Harper was falling apart. She was a systems engineer, conditioned for climate-controlled server rooms and ergonomic chairs, not a 100-degree rainforest incline. Every breath she took was a ragged, whistling gasp. She stumbled over a massive, moss-slicked root, going down hard on her knees, the heavy silver pouches of water in her arms spilling into the mud. I can't, Harper choked out, her face flushed a dangerous, muddled red. She didn't try to get up. Leave the water. Just go. I'm slowing you down. I stopped, turning back to grab her by the straps of her ruined vest. I didn't offer a hand. I hauled her up by brute force, slamming her back against the trunk of a tree to keep her upright. You leave the water, you die of kidney failure tomorrow, I said, my voice harsh, cutting straight through her rising hysteria. I leaned in, forcing her to look at me. Panic destroys your oxygen efficiency, Harper. You were burning through your reserves because you were taking shallow, panicked breaths. Breathe from your stomach. Now, match my rhythm. I held her gaze, exaggerating the slow, deep draw of air into my lungs. It took 3 seconds, but the analytical part of her brain finally overrode the animal terror. She nodded, mimicking my breathing, her chest heaving as she swallowed the air. Good, I muttered, picking up 2 of the water pouches and shoving them back into her arms. Now keep moving. I glanced back at Iris. The corporate spy hadn't dropped a single pouch. She wasn't panting. She moved through the uneven, treacherous terrain with the terrifying, silent efficiency of a ghost. She met my eyes, offering absolutely nothing in return. Whatever training Vanguard had put her through, it wasn't for auditing spreadsheets. We pushed through the last 100 yards of the dense canopy. I thought the jungle was the trap. I didn't realize the beach was the killing floor. The first thing I noticed as we neared the edge of the tree line wasn't the sound of the ocean. It was the sudden, absolute absence of the jungle. The deafening symphony of nocturnal insects and exotic birds that had surrounded us all morning instantly went dead quiet. In nature, when the ambient noise of an ecosystem flatlines, it means only one thing: an apex predator has entered the radius. Get down, I hissed, dropping into a deep crouch behind a thick wall of broadleaf ferns just as the blinding glare of the black sand beach came into view. Harper hit the dirt beside me, trembling violently. Iris slid silently behind a rotting log. I parted the leaves just enough to see the shoreline. The wreckage of the Gulf Stream was still smoking quietly. Maya was still unconscious under the palm frond. Chloe was curled up near the rocks. And Victoria was standing right in the open, smoothing her ruined skirt, looking expectantly toward the northern curve of the island. She had heard something. "They're coming," Victoria called out to the group, her voice cracking with a desperate, euphoric relief. She took a few steps toward the water, waving her arms. "I told you. It's a retrieval team. Vanguard protocol." From the dense shadows of the northern tree line, about 200 yards down the beach, the active assets emerged. There were 4 of them. They weren't wearing paramedic red or Coast Guard orange. They were clad entirely in matte black, heavily armored tactical gear that absorbed the sunlight rather than reflecting it. Their faces were completely obscured by featureless, mirrored ballistic masks. They didn't shout instructions. They didn't run. They moved with a slow, synchronized, lethal fluidity, spreading out in a wide tactical formation to flank the crash site. "Oh my God," Harper whispered next to me, her fingernails digging painfully into my forearm. "Those aren't rescue workers. Those are PMCs. Private military. They're a cleanup crew," Iris corrected softly from the dirt behind us, her voice finally betraying a thread of genuine fear. My eyes swept over the beach, bypassing Victoria entirely. I was looking for Stella. I found her. She was standing near the edge of the volcanic rocks, completely still. But unlike Victoria, Stella wasn't looking at the approaching soldiers. She was staring directly at the wall of the jungle where I was hiding. She had been waiting for me to come back. Even from 50 yards away, across a stretch of burning sand, the eye contact between us was electric. It was a silent, visceral collision. I saw the exact moment she registered the threat. Her posture didn't crumble, it tightened into a coiled spring. She didn't scream to warn Victoria. Her eyes stayed locked on mine, silently demanding to know what my move was. She wasn't looking for a savior. She was looking for a partner in whatever violence was about to happen. I tightened my grip on the tactical knife. It was a pathetic weapon against heavily armored operators, but it was all I had. Down on the sand, Victoria was still waving. "Over here. We have wounded. We need an immediate medevac." The lead operative didn't answer. He didn't even break stride. Without a single word, he smoothly raised a short-barreled, suppressed assault rifle to his shoulder. A brilliant, thin line of green laser light cut through the hazy tropical air. It swept effortlessly across the black sand, tracked up Victoria's torn skirt, and settled perfectly still directly over the center of her chest. The green beam didn't tremble, it held dead center on the torn silk of Victoria's blouse. I tightened my grip on the tactical knife until the rough polymer handle bit into my palm, my mind frantically calculating the sprint distance across the open sand. It was 50 yards. 50 yards of loose, yielding volcanic ash against a suppressed, short-barreled rifle, which meant I was dead before I crossed 20. Beside me, Harper let out a microscopic, choked whimper. Her eyes rolled back slightly as the sheer terror threatened to knock her into a dead faint. If she passed out and crashed into the broadleaf ferns, the noise would draw the operator's fire directly into the tree line. Before I could grab her, Iris moved. The corporate spy slipped a hand over Harper's mouth and pressed her forearm hard into the engineer's sternum, pinning her silently against the dirt. Iris didn't look at the beach. She looked at me, her face pale, but her eyes terrifyingly sharp. "Don't do it, Nalan," Iris whispered, her lips barely moving. "They're cleaners. Tier 1 private military. If you break cover, they won't ask for your employee ID. They will classify you as a hostile variable and terminate." "They're about to execute Victoria." I breathed back, the adrenaline turning the blood in my veins to ice. "Watch his finger," Iris commanded coldly. "It's indexed outside the trigger guard. He's establishing compliance, not initiating a kill." I looked back through the gap in the waxy leaves. Iris was right. Get down on the ground. Face in the sand. Hands behind your head. The lead operator barked. It was the first time any of them had spoken, and the voice was heavily distorted by a synthesized modulator built into his ballistic mask. It didn't sound human. It sounded like an algorithm giving an execution order. Victoria's corporate delusion shattered instantly. The CEO of Vanguard Holdings didn't argue. She collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably, and pressed her face into the black sand. Chloe screamed and threw herself down beside her. The 4 operators moved with terrifying efficiency. 2 of them swept the perimeter of the wreckage, their weapons tracking smoothly across the debris field. The 3rd operative bypassed the women entirely, vaulting up into the tilted, smoking belly of the cargo hold. The 4th operative, the leader, began zip-tying the women on the sand. I thought the hardest part of this nightmare was watching the laser paint Victoria's chest. I was wrong. The hardest part was what happened next. The leader moved to Stella. She hadn't dropped to the sand. She was still on her knees near the edge of the volcanic rocks, her posture rigid, her dark eyes still locked directly on the patch of jungle where she knew I was hiding. She wasn't looking at the man with the gun. She was looking at me, silently commanding me to stay hidden. Face down. "Now," the operator ordered, stepping into her space. Stella didn't move fast enough. The operator grabbed her by the shoulder, the injured shoulder that had been dislocated just yesterday. Stella let out a sharp, agonizing gasp as he shoved her roughly toward the dirt. The physical brutality of the man handling her sent a violent, blinding spike of pure, unfiltered rage straight through my system. The cold, analytical auditor vanished. Every primal instinct I had screamed at me to break the tree line, to drive the galley knife through the back of his tactical vest. My muscles coiled, my weight shifting forward onto the balls of my feet. "Nalan, stop!" Iris hissed, her hand shooting out to grip my ankle with surprising strength. "Look at the cargo hold." I forced my eyes away from Stella, my chest heaving, the blood roaring in my ears. The 3rd operative was climbing down from the ruined underbelly of the Gulf Stream. He wasn't carrying survival supplies, and he wasn't carrying the black box flight recorder. He was carrying a heavily reinforced, watertight Pelican case. It was small, maybe the size of a briefcase, but from the way the heavily muscled PMC strained to lower it to the ground, it was incredibly dense. "Asset secured," the operative with the case announced over the external comms. "Copy that," the leader replied. He finished pulling a thick plastic zip tie tight around Stella's wrists, binding them painfully tight behind her back. He stood up, scanning the beach one last time. "Initiate secondary protocol. Wipe the site." Harper let out a muffled sob against Iris's hand. Wipe the site. That didn't mean extraction. That meant leaving no witnesses. The operator who had secured the Pelican case pulled a cylindrical, silver canister from his tactical rig. He twisted the cap, a bright red LED flaring to life on its side. It was an incendiary grenade designed to burn at 3,000 degrees, hot enough to melt aviation aluminum and turn bone to ash. He aimed it toward the center of the wreckage, right where the auxiliary fuel tank was buried in the sand. If that tank went up, the blast radius would vaporize Victoria, Chloe, Stella, and Maya. I didn't think. I just acted. I reached down to my belt, my fingers wrapping around the cold, heavy plastic of the flare gun Harper had salvaged the day before. It only had 2 rounds. I hadn't wanted to use it because it would give away our position, but the calculus of survival had just changed. I raised the bright orange barrel, resting it over the rotting log to steady my aim. I didn't aim at the operatives. I aimed high, directly into the thick canopy of the jungle behind them. I pulled the trigger. The flare gun bucked in my hand with a deafening crack. A blazing ball of magnesium phosphorus shot out of the tree line, streaking directly over the beach like a miniature sun. It slammed into the thick, dry fronds of a massive palm tree on the northern ridge. Instantly, the tree erupted into a towering column of blinding, roaring fire. The PMC squad reacted purely on tactical conditioning. At the sudden explosion of light and sound, they dropped into defensive crouches, their rifles snapping up to track the trajectory of the flare. Hostile contact. North Ridge. The leader shouted, his weapon completely off the women on the sand. Do it now, I growled, shoving the flare gun back into my belt and grabbing the water pouches. We didn't run toward the beach, we fell back into the jungle. In a tactical sweep, the hunter doesn't look for the prey. They look for the disruption in the environment. I had just given them a massive disruption, but it was only going to buy us about 60 seconds before they realized the flare was a diversion. I moved fast, dragging Harper by her vest as Iris sprinted silently ahead of us. We tore through the waxy leaves and thick vines, putting as much distance between us and the tree line as possible. We were 100 yards deep into the dense canopy when the deafening, concussive boom of the incendiary grenade echoed off the volcanic rock. The ground beneath my boots shuddered violently. A wave of superheated air ripped through the jungle, shaking the leaves and sending a shower of dead branches crashing down around us. I stopped, turning back toward the direction of the beach. Black, oily smoke was already rising above the tree line, blotting out the morning sun. They blew the plane. Harper choked out, collapsing against a tree trunk, tears streaming down her dirty face. Nolan, did they blow the plane with them still on the sand? I stared at the thick, black pillar of smoke. I could still feel the phantom heat of Stella's skin from the morning, the heavy, possessive way she had leaned against me. If they were dead, I had just lost the only person on this island who knew the truth about the crash. And if they were alive, they were now prisoners of Vanguard Holdings. The shockwave of the incendiary grenade didn't just checkmate the island, it sucked the oxygen straight out of the canopy. I leaned against the rough, damp bark of a mahogany tree, my ears ringing with a high-pitched whine that effectively drowned out the sounds of the jungle. A thick, toxic cloud of black smoke was rolling over the tops of the trees, turning the morning sun into a sickly, bruised orange. My chest felt entirely hollowed out, as if the blast had reached into my ribcage and crushed my lungs. I closed my eyes, and for 3 agonizing seconds, all I could feel was the phantom pressure of Stella's hands grabbing my shirt at dawn. I could still smell the salt and dark vanilla on her skin. I could still feel the aggressive, possessive heat of her body pressed against mine, and hear the raw desperation in her voice. Don't you ever walk away from me in the dark. I had walked away. I had left her zip-tied in the sand. And now the beach was a crater of molten aluminum. A sudden, sharp spike of violent grief hit me so hard my injured knee buckled. I caught myself on the trunk of the tree, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the galley knife. The cold, analytical auditor, the man who survived by seeing patterns and controlling his pulse, was fracturing. In his place, something much darker, something entirely primal and violently territorial, was clawing its way to the surface. They're not dead. The voice was terrifyingly calm, cutting through the ringing in my ears. I snapped my head up. Iris was standing 5 feet away, wiping a smear of black ash from her cheek. She didn't look back toward the beach. She was already scanning the dense foliage ahead of us. Harper, who was curled into a tight ball in the dirt, let out a ragged, hysterical breath. We just felt the ground shake. Iris. They threw a bomb into a jet fuel tank with 4 women tied up less than 50 feet away. The incendiary grenade was a site-wide protocol. It's designed to vaporize the airframe, the serial numbers, and any electronic diagnostics left in the cockpit, Iris explained, her tone as clinical as if she were reading a early compliance report. It's a localized thermal reaction, not a fragmentation explosive. The blast radius is tightly controlled. I pushed myself off the tree, closing the distance between us until I was towering over her. The violent adrenaline was still boiling in my blood, demanding an outlet. How do you know they didn't just leave them there to burn? I demanded, my voice a low, lethal rasp. Iris didn't flinch at my proximity. She looked up, meeting my gaze with a chilling, absolute certainty. Because Vanguard doesn't waste leverage, Nolan. And they don't incinerate the CEO unless the board has explicitly authorized an assassination. If the cleaners wanted them dead, the sniper would have pulled the trigger. Taking them alive means they are being moved to a secure holding area. I stared into her eyes, searching for a lie, a crack in the armor. I found nothing but cold, corporate pragmatism. I thought the explosion was the end of the Vanguard protocol. I was wrong. It was just the reset. The board hadn't just crashed us. They had initiated a hostile takeover of our lives. We need to move, I said, forcing the rage down into a tight, heavy knot in my stomach. I turned to Harper. Get up. Harper didn't move. She was hyperventilating again, her hands gripping her hair. I crouched down, checking the salvage I had forced her to carry. The reality of survival rarely cares about your emotional state, and the island was quick to remind us of the cost of panic. When I had dragged Harper into the dirt to hide from the sniper's laser, the impact had ruptured one of the foil pouches. A fifth of our salvaged water had bled out into the muddy soil. We had 5 pouches left, 3 people, and a heavily armed tactical squad sweeping the grid. The math was brutally unforgiving. Harper, look at me, I commanded, grabbing her wrists and pulling them away from her face. You stay here, the cleaners will find you on their sweep. They will zip tie you, and they will drag you into the dark with the others. Get on your feet. Now. Fear is a paralytic, but a direct, immediate threat is a powerful motivator. Harper gave a shuddering sob, but she let me pull her upright. Where exactly are we going? She whispered, her voice completely broken. They have thermal optics. They have motion trackers. We can't hide in the bushes forever. We aren't hiding in the bushes, Iris said, turning away and walking deeper into the dense undergrowth. We're going off the grid. The biometric scanner I accessed earlier didn't just give me water. It gave me the structural layout of the sector. There's a blind spot about a half-mile north of here. A topographical anomaly where the subterranean mesh network can't broadcast. Lead the way, I said. We moved in absolute silence. The humidity was crushing, the air thick with the acrid scent of burning jet fuel blowing in off the coast. Every snapped twig sounded like a gunshot. Every shadow looked like a matte black ballistic mask. The psychological toll of being hunted was exhausting, draining our physical reserves faster than the heat. After 30 minutes of brutal, uphill trekking through a tangled ravine, Iris finally stopped. We were standing at the base of a massive, sheer cliff face made of jagged, black volcanic rock. Thick vines hung down like a curtain, completely obscuring the stone. Iris stepped forward and used both hands to violently tear the vines apart. Behind the prehistoric greenery wasn't rock. It was a heavy, reinforced steel blast door, painted matte gray to blend with the shadows. A heavy digital keypad and a keycard slot sat dead center on the metal frame. A maintenance hatch, Iris murmured, pulling the military-grade mag key from her pocket. It connects to the subterranean utility tunnels. The concrete and the bedrock block thermal imaging. Once we're inside, we don't exist. She slid the card into the slot. I watched the small LED light above the keypad, expecting it to turn green. It didn't. It blinked a harsh, rapid red. The heavy steel door remained locked, completely immovable. Iris frowned, a subtle twitch of confusion breaking her perfect composure. She swiped the card again, slower this time. Red. Your clearance was revoked? I asked, my grip tightening on the knife. No, Iris whispered, her eyes widening slightly as she stared at a tiny, digital readout screen beneath the card slot. My clearance is fine. The lock hasn't been disabled. She stepped back, the blood slowly draining from her face. It's been overridden, she said, her voice dropping to a terrified breath. From the inside. Someone is already down there. And they just locked us out. I didn't have the luxury of panicking over a locked door. The jungle behind us was already beginning to bleed a faint, unnatural green light. It was subtle at first, just a pale sweep cutting through the dense, smoky canopy, but the rhythmic, mechanical hum accompanying it was unmistakable. The cleaners weren't just sweeping the grid on foot. They had deployed low-altitude thermal drones to flush us out of the blind spot. "They're coming," Harper whimpered, her back sliding down the jagged volcanic rock until she hit the dirt. She pulled her knees to her chest, rocking slightly. The psychological dam had completely burst. "They're going to burn us out." I ignored her, my eyes locked on Iris. The corporate spy hadn't frozen. The moment the red access denied light flashed, she dropped to one knee, pulling a sleek, matte black multi-tool from the waistband of her slacks. She jammed the titanium flathead into the seam of the heavy digital keypad and wrenched it hard. The reinforced plastic faceplate snapped off, exposing a chaotic nest of localized wiring and optical fibers. "Can you short it?" I asked, my voice dropping to a harsh, tight whisper. I stepped back, placing my body squarely between the open ravine and the two women. "It's a localized intranet relay. If I cross the analog failsafe with the primary power conduit, it should trigger an emergency release," Iris muttered, her fingers flying over the wires with terrifying practice speed. "But it's going to trip an internal breaker. Whoever is on the other side of this door will know exactly what we're doing." "Do it," I ordered. I turned my back to the steel door and stared into the dark, tangled vines of the ravine. The green sweep of the drone was getting closer, painting to broadleaf ferns and toxic, vibrant flashes. My right hand gripped the heavy handle of the galley knife so tightly my knuckles ached. The temperature in the ravine was suffocating, thick with the smell of wet earth and distant jet fuel, but my blood felt like liquid nitrogen. I wasn't an operator. I didn't know close quarters combat. But the island was systematically stripping away the civilized auditor and leaving something incredibly dangerous in his place. My mind violently flashed back to the beach, to the PMC operator shoving Stella into the black sand. A sudden, blinding spike of rage hit me. It wasn't the noble, protective anger of a leader. It was raw, ugly, and entirely territorial. The memory of Stella's body pressed against mine, the heat of her skin, the desperate grip of her hands in my hair, the heavy, intoxicating scent of her neck was a physical brand on my nervous system. She had claimed me in the dark, and I had left her zip-tied in the dirt. If I died against this rock, I left her to them. The thought triggered a violent, chemical shift in my brain. The fear completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, predatory focus. I didn't just want to survive this ravine. I wanted to drive the serrated edge of the galley knife through the Kevlar vest of the man who put his hands on her. "Nolan," Iris hissed from the door. 10 seconds. Before I could answer, the heavy, wet foliage 30 yards down the ravine violently rustled. The low hum of the drone suddenly spiked in pitch. A sleek, quadrotor Vanguard Seeker drone, no bigger than a hawk, dropped through the canopy. Its undercarriage was fitted with a thermal optical lens, glowing a faint, menacing red. It hovered for a fraction of a second, the lens snapping directly toward my chest. The heat signature of 3 terrified humans pressed against a cold stone wall was a beacon. I didn't hesitate. I didn't wait for it to transmit a clean visual. I lunged forward, grabbing a heavy, waterlogged branch from the mud and swung it like a baseball bat. The thick wood smashed into the drone midair, shattering the rotors and sending the expensive piece of Vanguard hardware crashing into the ravine wall in a shower of sparks. NCR. Act plastic. Target acquired. Anomaly in the North Ravine. The voice echoed through the trees. It wasn't the drone. It was the synthesized, metallic modulator of a cleaner. 3 thin, perfectly straight beams of green laser light pierced the heavy shadows, tracking rapidly up the muddy incline toward our position. "Iris," I snarled, dropping the branch and pulling the knife back up. "Quiet." A shower of blue sparks erupted from the exposed keypad. A heavy, hydraulic groan vibrated through the bedrock. The massive steel blast door shuddered, the airtight seal breaking with a sharp hiss, and slowly slid open. It didn't open fully. It jammed after exactly 18 inches, leaving a narrow, pitch-black gap leading into the subterranean tunnels. "Move!" I grabbed Harper by the collar of her vest, hauling her violently to her feet and shoving her toward the gap. She didn't argue. The sheer terror of the approaching lasers gave her the adrenaline she needed. She squeezed through the heavy steel frame, disappearing into the dark. Iris slid through next, smooth and efficient, not making a sound. "Hostiles visually confirmed." Engaging, the modulated voice barked. I threw myself sideways just as the deafening, suppressed thwip 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 of automatic fire tore through the jungle. High-velocity rounds slammed into the volcanic rock where my head had been a second ago, showering me in razor-sharp stone shrapnel. I hit the ground hard, rolling toward the narrow opening of the blast door. I jammed my shoulder through the gap, my boots kicking against the mud as I forced my body into the freezing, pitch-black tunnel. Another volley of bullets sparked off the outer steel shell. As I dragged my legs inside, I reached back to grab the heavy manual override lever on the inner frame to pull the door shut. But my hand didn't find the steel lever. In the absolute, suffocating darkness of the bunker, another hand reached out and grabbed my wrist. The grip was freezing cold, incredibly strong, and entirely human. Before I could drive the knife upward, the unseen person violently yanked the heavy hydraulic lever down. The massive blast door slammed shut with a deafening boom, sealing out the jungle, the cleaners, and the daylight. The heavy deadbolts automatically engaged with a series of heavy, metallic clacks. We were locked in. I ripped my arm out of the stranger's grip, stepping back, raising the knife in the pitch black. "Who's there?" I demanded, my chest heaving, the adrenaline turning my voice into a lethal, ragged growl. A single, harsh fluorescent emergency light flickered to life on the concrete ceiling above us, casting long, sickly yellow shadows down the concrete corridor. Standing 10 feet away from me, his hands raised in a placating gesture, was a man wearing a torn, blood-stained white button-down shirt. He had a Vanguard Holdings corporate ID badge dangling from his belt. It was the co-pilot of the Gulfstream G650. The heavy galley knife was at his throat before he could even lower his hands. I didn't think about the movement. My body just executed it, slamming the co-pilot backward until his spine hit the cold concrete wall of the bunker. The blade pressed directly into the soft hollow beneath his jaw. "Nolan, wait!" Harper shrieked, her voice echoing violently in the cramped, concrete tunnel. I didn't look at her. My eyes were locked entirely on the terrified, sweating face of the man who had flown us into a slaughterhouse. He was younger than I remembered, maybe early 30s, but right now, covered in grease and dried blood, he looks like a cornered animal. "You locked the cabin door," I growled, my voice vibrating with a dark, lethal edge that I didn't recognize as my own. "You strapped into your seat, you threw the deadbolts, and you left 11 people to burn in the sand. Give me one reason I shouldn't open your throat right now." "I didn't lock it," he choked out, his hands hovering frantically around my wrist, afraid to touch the arm holding the knife. "I swear to God, I didn't lock the door. The mainframe did." I pressed the serrated edge a fraction of an inch deeper. A single bead of blood welled up against the steel. "Planes don't lock their own doors." "This one did," he gasped, his eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. We were at 35 feet when the entire avionics bay flashed red. We didn't lose power, we were overridden. Someone on the ground wiped our access codes, engaged the cabin deadbolts, and piloted us down by remote. They pulled us out of the sky. I stared at him, the violent adrenaline in my blood suddenly running ice cold. I thought the crash was a mechanical failure exploited by a corrupt company. I was wrong. The crash was a controlled demolition. I slowly lowered the knife, stepping back just enough to let him breathe. The cleaners sweeping the jungle. Are they Vanguard? The co-pilot slumped against the wall, rubbing his neck, coughing weakly. They're Blackridge. Tier 1 contractors. Vanguard hires them to sanitize high-value sites when there's a containment breach. They didn't come to sanitize us, Iris said. She stepped out of the shadows, the sickly yellow emergency light catching the sharp, cold angles of her face. The corporate spy had her hands neatly folded, her posture radiating absolute authority. The co-pilot looked at her, his eyes widening in sudden, horrific recognition. Your compliance. You were on the passenger manifest. Oh, Jesus! They didn't tell me an internal auditor was on board. What were the cleaners extracting from the cargo hold? Iris demanded, completely ignoring his panic. Her voice was pure ice. A reinforced pelican case. Highly dense. What was in it? I don't know, the co-pilot whispered, shaking his head frantically. The captain loaded it himself in Honolulu. He said it was a biological proprietary asset. That's all I know. When the plane went down, he broke his neck on the console. I barely got out before the smoke filled the cockpit. So they shot down a $50 million Gulfstream, risked the lives of the CEO and 10 employees just to securely deliver a locked box to a black site island? I asked, my mind rapidly piecing together the twisted, corporate logic. We were collateral damage to cover up a delivery. You're not collateral, the co-pilot said, his voice dropping to a hollow, haunted whisper. He looked away from me, staring down the dark, concrete corridor that stretched deeper into the island's subterranean bedrock. Vanguard doesn't believe in collateral. They believe in resource allocation. He pushed himself off the wall and limped heavily down the corridor. Follow me. If you want to know what happened to the women on the beach, you need to see this. We followed him deeper into the bunker. The air grew significantly colder, smelling of ozone and industrial sterile cleaner. We entered a small, reinforced security hub. Banked along the far wall was a row of dusty monitors, powered by the facility's localized emergency grid. The co-pilot leaned over the console and typed a rapid sequence into the keyboard. 3 of the monitors flickered, the static giving way to stark, high-definition black and white security feeds. I stopped breathing. It wasn't a prison. It looked like a high-tech, subterranean medical observation ward. The walls were blindingly white, lined with heavy, soundproof glass cells. In the first cell, Victoria was sitting on a steel cot, her face buried in her hands, her corporate empire completely reduced to ashes. In the second cell, May was strapped into a medical chair, Roman 4 lines running into her arm while an automated vitals monitor blinked steadily beside her. And in the third cell was Stella. She was standing dead center in the middle of the room. The PMCs had cut the zip ties off her wrists. Her ruined silk blouse was hanging off her shoulder, exposing the dark bruises where the operator had shoved her into the dirt. But she wasn't crying. She wasn't pacing in panic. She was staring directly up into the security camera in the corner of her cell. Her dark eyes were burning with a terrifying, unapologetic fury. Even through the grainy black and white monitor, I could feel the sheer, gravitational pull of her presence. She wasn't looking at Vanguard. She was looking for me. She knew with absolute certainty that I was alive, and she was waiting for me to tear this island apart to find her. My hand moved to the monitor, my fingertips brushing the cold glass right over her face. The phantom heat of her skin flared in my memory, a violent, possessive surge that completely erased any remaining trace of my former life. I didn't care about the company anymore. I didn't care about the rescue protocol. They didn't kill them, Harper breathed, tears of relief spilling over her dirty cheeks. Nala and they're alive. For now, the co-pilot said grimly, tapping the edge of the console. He pointed to a digital readout at the bottom of the feed. It didn't say holding block. It said clinical trial area subject intake. They aren't prisoners, Nalan, Iris whispered, staring at the screens, the first real trace of horror bleeding into her clinical voice. They're test subjects.